G'day, brothers and sisters. This is the other Paul, and welcome to a very, very special and unique interview that we have today. One that's I've said multiple times now in promoting this, but easily one of my most unusual interviews, as it doesn't have to do with crazy academic levels of theological discourse, but instead something more wholesome and yet still very profound with respect to Christianity. And so I am here with the one and only Pastor C.R. Wiley, author of, well, multiple books, including one which is very relevant to today's interview. So, and here to talk about the character of Tom Bombadil in the excellent Lord of the Rings trilogy, or more specifically, just really the Fellowship of the Ring. So, Pastor Wiley, how are you doing this fine, sunny Australian morning?
Well, I'm well. It's afternoon here in Washington State in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, but I'm doing great, Paul.
Excellent to hear. All right, so I think a good number of people watching here will probably know about you, but just in case, could you give a brief rundown about yourself?
Sure. Well, like I noted, I'm a pastor, or you noted, I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I actually live in a town called Battleground, but Battleground is right next to Vancouver, where the church I serve meets, and we're right outside of Portland, Oregon. So we're on the other side of the Columbia River from those guys. And anyway, I've written a number of books, as you noted. I've been a college professor and a real estate investor and a home improvement contractor. And I taught philosophy for about a decade at the college level. And
Wow.
so, I've got kind of a fair sampling of things that I've done. And I'm an illustrator as well. I draw stuff. In fact, the cover of the book that we're talking about, I'm the guy who drew the cover.
Far out, good on you. Yeah, I like that kind of stuff. Being involved from A to Z in production stuff, not having to outsource as little as possible. That's pretty epic. So you actually made the art yourself. That is pretty darn cool. And actually, I won't do that bit. But yes, to jump right into it. So today we're going to be discussing the character, and really the whole topic around him of Tom Bombadil from the Fellowship of the Ring in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Who he is, what's his function, why is he even there? Is he there for any reason at all? And in what way does he reflect some kind of Christian ideal? And I guess even to speak more specifically, as you say in your book, Tolkien's Catholic faith, but something which even us non-Catholics can even draw from as well, because at least he's not. Well, I guess I do a lot of interaction with Roman Catholics in this channel, so I won't get sidetracked on that right now. But I guess to jump right into it right now, where did your interest in Tom Bombadil stem from?
Well, I'm a fan of Tolkien. I've read him since I was a teenager. Back I got introduced to him in the early 70s. So Tolkien, Lord of the Rings and all that was a big deal then, but not anywhere near the cultural phenomenon that it is today. But unlike anybody else who's read The Lord of the Rings, I was intrigued by Tom. I was never put out by him like some people seem to be. I was always more or less taken by him. And because he was so enigmatic and seemed to on one hand, be unnecessary, I had to conclude, knowing what I know about Tolkien, that for that very reason, he was incredibly necessary. And so I took a different approach to thinking about Tom than I think generally is the case. But that's kind of how I got into the character. And there's also just the fact that he's fun. I enjoy him. He's, of all the characters in Lord of the Rings, he's probably the guy that I'd like to have a beer with the most.
100% true.
Right.
That is I've only relatively recently, I think like last year, began reading The Lord of the Rings, and I knew very lightly of this character called Tom Bombadil, who wasn't included in the trilogy. And some people were like, no, why isn't he in it? And other people were like, oh, he was totally pointless. Nothing was lost by him not being in the movies. And when I finally got to that chapter, I saw immediately how the plot wasn't advanced in that mechanical way, but I was just smiling the whole way through. It was just this kind of picturesque, very wholesome view of something, of
Right.
some very fascinating character who was clearly powerful to some degree, as some moments in the chapter showed, and so I kind of had a similar reaction. Like, there's something quite big and really powerful to him. I guess I guess one way to stop it, to keep it, to get this going, because one of the main questions put in about the big overall thing, why do you think Tolkien included it in the story? And that's pretty much your whole book. So there's a billion sub questions involved in that. So I guess we wanted to get involved in that in one of the more not so serious but still fun questions. What is your preferred theory of like what Tom is? I know you talk about how like, well, Tom is Tom, you know, like he is.
Right.
But like, what do you think? Do you place him being one of the Ironwood or something like that? Or?
Well, I think that makes the most sense if we're going to work with the categories that we've been given. But Tolkien, at different points in the story, reveals that that there's just stuff going on that's just utterly strange and doesn't fit into neat categories. At one point, he actually says that Tom isn't intended to be enigmatic, and that there's always enigmatic features to the world. But we see in different places in, say, even in the Lord of the Rings and even the Fellowship of the Ring, where you have things that just don't seem to have a category, like the Watcher at the gates. So, you know, when they're trying to get into the mines of Moria, we see this multi-tentacled thing, very much kind of Lovecraftian almost. It just emerges from the depths and has some kind of ability, you know, has some insight into who is important and who, and we don't know why. We can maybe intuit that the ring has something to do with it, but this thing just doesn't have a category. It's just there, and it's incredibly scary, incredibly powerful. And then when Gandalf tells, you know, Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas about his battle with the Balrog, he alludes to dark things in the depths of the earth that again don't seem to fit anywhere else in the larger story. You know, they're not in the legendarium. But they're there. So I think there's something powerful and sublime to that, and I think Tom is maybe like, it could be thought of in that way. So I don't have a category at it. And I said, if you were to press me and say you must put Tom in one of the categories that we know, then I would say, yeah, he's one of the inner.
Yeah. I'd go that way myself, but that is a good way of you saying, like, if you're forced to do that category, as the modern Western reader would probably demand of you, you must please put this into something I can very easily put into my calculator of worldview. I can't have any mystery. That's just untenable. By the way, really quickly before we continue, I'm terribly sorry. I completely neglected to mention this. Normally, in my interviews, at the tail end of them, when things are concluded, I'll have an audience Q&A. Are you keen to have that, or would you need?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's fine. I'm happy to talk to folks.
100%. So you heard it from the man, people. Post your questions for the Q&A. Supporters and super chats get first priority, and then I go on to other people. So get your questions in, and I will bring them up at the end for Q&A for Pastor Wiley to address. But yeah, this whole thing about categorizations, as you mentioned, and especially as you go in your book, Bombadil and the whole episode with Bombadil really does defy the persistent, especially today's expectations about wanting to put things into these easy categories to be able to do it, and especially as exemplified when Frodo even asks Goldberry, "Who is Tom Bombadil?" and Goldberry just says, "He is." And and you note how that somewhat in a way may allude to the whole Exodus thing. I am who I am. And you go into that whole discussion, and then you basically go into this whole philosophical discussion about the nature of naming things and identity and what it means and all that. Could you unpack that a bit for us here, and what significance that bears for us for understanding Bombadil?
Yeah, well, the modern outlook is that naming is an arbitrary exercise, that it's entirely, sort of historical in character, kind of socially conditioned, what have you. You know, we all know that shtick, but that's not what Tolkien thought, and that's not certainly what people have thought for time out of mind in every part of the world. we look in scripture, we can see that names are tremendously significant, and they give you some insight into the character of the person that's named. So, for just a easy example would be Jacob. His name means the heel grabber, the deceiver, the one who trips other people up in order to get ahead of them in line. And that's exactly what he does throughout the course of the story. So it's like the name is like a warning. It's like a big sign on the head that says, watch out for this guy. Same thing with his brother Esau. His name means red. He was a violent man. You didn't want to mess with that guy. He would rip your head off. Warning, this guy is violent. That kind of stuff. When Adam names Eve, he does it for a reason. He has insight into her nature. The name means the mother of the living, and so on it goes. Like when we look at the episode with Adam naming the animals in Eden, generally the modern exegete assumes that that's just an arbitrary exercise and whatever made Adam feel happy, or whatever. But I think based on how Adam names the Eve as a category, woman, and then gives her proper name, Eve, it tells us something about the way he proceeded, generally speaking. And then everything else in Genesis gives us insight into that. Abram, exalted father. Abraham, father of many nations. It's just, it's all there. And Tolkien was much more in touch with that. We see it particularly, there are certain points in the story where we get a sense of that. And it's most evident with the episode in Fangorn with Treebeard. The language of the Ents. Every word tells the story of the thing that it's in other words, the name is the story. That's why it takes so long to name anything. So I think names they just were understood differently than we think of them today. They're meaningful.
Yeah, that's very true. Is there any idea on what Bombadil's name means, other than just being some random collection of syllables?
Yeah, well, I do think that there's a kind of a bombastic character there. I do think there's a kind of onomatopoeia feature to, and really when you think about Hebrew, it does have an onomatopoeia character. You think about Yitzhak. Isaac means laughter. It actually sounds like a laugh. So I do think that Tolkien is having some fun. Now, Bombadil is older than the story. He's actually older than even The Hobbit. That we have the poem, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, and it predates the publication of The Hobbit. So he really is the oldest character in Middle Earth. You could say for that reason alone. But I think that Tolkien's having some fun with the name, and he's actually doing some profound things, not just with his name, but with Tom's behavior, and his own speech is a huge part of the story, or at least his role in the story. Gives us insight into the nature of Middle Earth.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that actually that seems very obvious now that I see it. Something that's bombastic and it's onomatopoeic. That actually does make perfect sense, because, well, that's pretty much just how he operates.
Right.
And you also speak. I was actually shocked when I read through. I still haven't finished it, but I read through big portions of your book, and just shocked how you managed to take something that's seemingly simple as a minor enigmatic side character in a story and use that as an excuse to get into the very into such philosophical issues as the nature of mathematics and music and language and all this stuff.
Right.
And you use this as well to the episode with Bombadil, especially with how he does something as simple as like singing to the old willow in order to free one of the hobbits from it. And you use that to get into the weeds of the whole 7 different forms of education, like particularly the quadrivium, if I'm remembering correctly, with respect to music. So what does Bombadil, what does this episode reveal about like how music works, I guess, both in Middle Earth, but especially Tolkien's deeper understanding of what music is meant to be, other than just nice sounds?
Yeah, well, music, as it's understood in the quadrivium, is kind of the end point of everything that leads up to it. with the seven liberal arts, you have the trivium, and then you have the quadrivium, and human language, and then the language of creation maybe is another way to think about it. But with the quadrivium, you begin with mathematics, then you move up to geometry, then you move up to astronomy, and then the final stage, or the highest level, is music. And they literally believed that there was a kind of musicality to the world. There was the music of the spheres. There was a kind of harmony that was evident all around us. And if you had the ear to hear, you would actually hear it. And so that's in the background. I'm pretty confident with all of the Inklings. The Inklings were men who believed in the liberal arts, believed in that whole frame of mind that kind of sees the world that way. So I don't think I'm reading anything into that stuff. But one of the things I think you see with Tolkien, his interest in language, but is also his interest in knowledge, the nature of knowledge. I think he's anti-Baconian all the way through. Knowledge is power, and so forth. The instrumental understanding of knowledge, as opposed to sort of a knowledge of essences, and knowledge of kind of the nature of things. What Bacon and all of the modern thinkers were trying to get away from was the essence of things. They wanted to instrumentalize everything so that we could exercise dominion in a very instrumental way, not in the way that you see Tom. So I think Tom is a picture of dominion properly understood, and the way that dominion is exercised is in harmony with the nature of things, their given natures that pre-exist, that are just simply present before the knower comes on the scene.
Yes, and that's a very big issue, very, very big, significant issue to look at. That I noticed when I was reading it, the chapter itself, with how Frodo saying like, Goldberry saying Tom is master, and then Frodo's like, oh, everything belongs to him, and she's confused and like, everything belongs to themselves, but nobody catches Tom and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And here I am thinking, I see this. It's almost like Tolkien commented on the whole egalitarian, complementarian patriarchy stuff before it even existed in a large scale in the evangelical world. And I find that very significant, because that does show something of a much more faithful understanding of dominion that with my experience, egalitarian theology writ large just does not really comprehend well, not consistently, at least. So I'm really glad you went into that. Could you expand on that? Why does Bombadil and Goldberry and the story writ large's understanding of good dominion, what is that, and how does that just sweep away modern presuppositions regarding dominion?
Yeah, well, egalitarianism is a modern approach to the Bible. I mean, let's just be perfectly frank about it.
Yeah.
I think what it loses sight of and doesn't give much room for is older ways of thinking about just everything. It makes sense within a particular frame of understanding, and that frame of understanding is that power is the most fundamental concern. And so what we need to think about is how power is exercised. And that's exactly what Sauron wants, is power.
Yeah.
He wants raw power. He doesn't want power that is already kind of woven into the fabric of things. So let's say I don't think it's a stretch to say Tolkien was a Thomist.
Really? No way.
Yeah, sure. That's right. So now a Thomist would say that things are already kind of prescribed, they're prescripted, not in a arbitrary and sort of domineering way, but in the interest of the things themselves, and also in the sense that they're all pursuing the ends for which they were made, and the pursuit of those ends, they find their happiness, or their purpose. Or when we're talking about human beings, we're talking about happiness, of course. But when it comes to approaching things in this way, what we see with Baconian science, and I think this is where Tom is is Tolkien's critique of the modern approach, the modern understanding of knowledge. The way we think about dominion is it might as well be a synonym for domination. That's what Saran wants. He wants to dominate. But dominion is not domination. Dominion is something more in the spirit of Tom Bombadil. And what we see with Tom is a delight in the things he sees around him, a desire to commune with them, not control them. He saves the hobbits and then invites them to dinner and then spends time, regaling them with stories and dancing with them and singing with them and just having a great time with them. You don't do that with Saran. When Saran says, "Hey, why don't you come over to my house?" There's something else in mind. He has in mind, to make you his slave, to control you. So anyway, I think that's at the heart, and this is why I think Tom is actually a foil and actually kind of a Rosetta Stone for understanding Tolkien's project. He's not. So the people who write Tom off as being unnecessary don't understand the author. This is a fussy writer and a very bright one, better educated than his critics. So why the presumption that you know more than him? Maybe you should just say, you know what? I don't understand what he's up to, but he's a whole lot smarter than me. I'm going to try to figure out what he's up to. I may not get it, but that means I'm stupid, not him. Crapola that people.
100%. So would you say, because this is totally my take, I think I tweeted about it shortly after or before I reached out to you on this, but would you say a person's Tom Bombadil acts like a foil in that sense, where a person's reaction to Bombadil in the whole episode in the story is more a reflection of them than on the character himself?
Yeah, this is why I'm glad Peter Jackson didn't put him in the story, because it means that Peter Jackson didn't get him and he would have done it wrong.
Yeah. I still shudder to think, because I haven't seen the Rings of Power series yet. Have you? Or because I've heard...
No, I stick with the revealed documents. I don't go into the Apocrypha. I don't do any of the the received canon. That's all I'm interested in.
100%. I'm a big Sola Scriptura guy myself, but well, I guess now even in the Legendarium as well. I guess let's go. How good? I've heard and I've seen some scenes from it that are pretty fantastically. Like they basically admitted that they're making their own whole new thing. So I shudder to think if they're going to try and incorporate, because season 2 is coming. I'm shudder to think if they're going to try and incorporate Bombadil somehow and what they might try to do with him.
Well, yeah, they'll ruin him like they ruined Goldberry, or not Goldberry, Galadriel.
So I've heard. Yeah, they basically turned her into like some epic girl boss who's like better than all the guys around her, rather than this graceful creature who is like a divine feminine almost in a certain way. They're basically trying to say, "Oh, girls, you got to be like men." It's
well, that's the problem with egalitarianism, generally speaking. It's not a celebration of difference. It's actually just trying to eliminate differences.
Yep, 100% true. 100% true. And so, I guess we can detour a little bit on that. Goldberry, what's she all about? Is she of any significance in this, or is she just kind of a reflection of Bombadil in some kind of way?
No, I think she's very significant. I mentioned I did a chapter on her, and I mentioned in the chapter that she's harder to work with because you have less to work with. But I do think that there are some things that we can say. She's a water spirit. I think that's undeniable. And then I think we can say some things about the folklore of Europe and the character of water spirits. They're kind of enigmatic and kind of unpredictable. One moment they can seem friendly, and the next moment they can drown you. And actually, if you're familiar with the poem, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, there's a point in the poem where Tom is looking down into the water, the Withywindle, and she's there beneath the surface looking up at him, and she grabs his beard and pulls him in. That water spirits, small bodies of water. That's the way they are. They're tricky that way. That's why, old wives would warn little children to stay away from the edge of the water because you could drown. Now I know there's a approach to folklore that people like to use that mainly understands folklore strictly in those terms, that it's just kind of code for watch out for this and watch out for that. You might get hurt, but I think there's more to folklore than that. But there is that, and I'm not denying it. But I did come across something in some research that I was conducting on water spirits that I suspect Tolkien knew about and he drew on in order to create the Goldberry character. So I can get into that if you like, but it has to do with Finnish folklore, and Tolkien we know that he loved and read Finnish folklore. So I suspect that he's drawing on a folk story about a particular water spirit to make the Goldberry character work.
Yeah, if you want to detail that, go ahead. This is
Well,
fascinating stuff.
she's beautiful. She has long golden hair. She combs it as she sits by the stream that she's the water spirit of. She's known as the River Devil's daughter. Not so if you know how Goldberry is referred to, she's the River Woman's daughter. So there's that parallel. There's the golden hair parallel, and there's also another parallel. If you catch her, she has to become your wife. And that's what Tom does at the very end of the Adventures of Tom Bombadil. Is he catches Goldberry, and she has to become his wife.
Not a very not something modern worldview would very much like with how to get women, but I guess.
Well, yeah, I think well, this is interesting to play with a little bit. In terms of taking a woman by force against her will, of course not. But there is always been a kind of joy that men and women have enjoyed in the game of the pursuit and capture. It's very flattering to be the object of someone's desire. Now, if the person is someone you don't want anything to do with, it's creepy.
Different story.
We call that stalking. But if the man who's pursuing the beautiful maiden is himself desirable and someone that she really does have an interest in, and she wants to know the extent of his interest, in other words, how much does he value me? Well, the pursuit is one of the things that tells her, the truth about him. So if he's enraptured with her, taken with her, pursuing her, and then she's playing hard to get and enjoying the chase, well, that's what you see in lots of medieval love poetry and that kind of thing.
Yes, and to kind of angle it back, because that itself would speak a bit to Bombadil's power, I guess, to be able to catch a water spirit, something that is itself something that catches other guys by surprise from the little.
Well, yeah. At that episode in the poem, she pulls him down. She takes his hat and she swims down into the depths. And Bombadil says, come back, pretty little water lady. I'm not coming to live with you down there below, because it's a flirtatious act that she has performed. It's not just teasing him; she's flirting with him. It's pretty evident. Anybody that's actually flirted, I know that's an odd thing for some guys who live in their basements to even, sort of
even comprehend.
Yeah, that's right. Flirtatious behavior is enjoyable. It's enjoyable for both parties if both are on board with it. But this is what's going on in that part of the story. She's flirting with him, and he's flirting back, but he's setting the conditions. He's saying, okay, all right, if we're going to be together, it's going to be on these terms, not your terms. And so he does have some gravitas.
Yes, yes, the man with the bright blue jacket and yellow boots. Very that speaks gravitas right there, voluminously. Actually, you know what? Now that I mentioned that, is there anything significant behind that? Behind those
Oh,
bright-colored clothing?
well, we do have the primary colors with his apple cheeks, the blue jacket, and the yellow boots.
Good point. Yeah.
Um, I don't know what to make of that, but it's definitely kind of a technicolor thing. I do know that when you blend those things together, you get white. Um, and that comes into play too, because I think there's a contrast there with Saruman of Many Colors,
Mm.
and Tom.
Yeah, that's getting unbelievably deep now. So before we get before we get absolutely lost in the woods on the whole nature of colors, there, that as I mentioned, that does the way Bombadil's able to get Goldberry that way and other episodes, it speaks to his power, especially with the old willow thing. This massive tree that could snare anyone and they won't be able to get out. But then he simply scolds it and sings to it, and then it lets go of one of the hobbits. And I see that how he is powerful. He's got a big deal of power. Goldberry says he's master of river and wood or something like that. But it's a different kind of power, not a mechanistic kind of power of just arbitrary in the sense of being able to be wielded however one wants, but a much more harmonious and directed kind of power that's unlike that Saruman and Sauron are trying to achieve. Could you explain that a bit for us as you did in your book?
Sure. So the scientific approach to understanding the world is one that breaks things down into the constituent parts to understand them. But in the process, what you end up with is a kind of abstraction of power, or I should say extraction. It's kind of a distillation process where you can break something up and refashion it in ways that suit your purposes. So you don't see that with Tom, but you definitely see that in Saruman and in Sauron. We have a lot of material to work with Saruman. We don't have as much with Sauron, unless you go back into the Legendarium. But what you have with Tom, though, is a knowledge of the music that allows him to, I think, get at the natures of things. So we know from the Legendarium in the creation story that the world is made with a song in the Silmarillion. So it's the great chorus of the Ainur that is the source of the world known as Middle Earth, and they enter into it after the song. But if you go back to the opening chapter of the Silmarillion, where the story of the creation is contained, told, there you see it. So the world is made with music. When Tom is introduced in the chapter, when they're in the old forest, when he's introduced, Tolkien says, kind of as an aside, that his singing seemed like nonsense. Now, again, Tolkien is a fussy writer, and his words are measured. He's not Dan Brown. He's not like somebody who's just an effusion of nonsense stuff. Everything he says and writes is purposeful. So when he says seem like nonsense, he's trying to make a distinction between what is nonsense and what may, to the unsort of knowing, the ignorant, seem like nonsense. And to the hobbits, it seems like nonsense. But when he sings, we see that he's able to sing in, sing them free. And he says that. He says, I'm going to sing them free. And then he does it. And you're like, well, how does that work? Well, this is a leap, maybe an inference that I think some people might think is a leap, but I think it's a fair inference. If the world is made with music and Tom frees them with a song, there's something about the song that sets things right. And we're told in this, as he's singing, that he takes a branch of the tree and, almost like to emphasize his point, he hits the tree with its own branch and then says, dig earth, drink water, go back to sleep. In other words, do tree things, stop doing things that aren't tree-like eating hobbits. Eating hobbits is not what trees are made for. So again, it brings us back to kind of a Thomist way of thinking about things. What are trees for? What are hobbits for? So when we think about causation, we should think about the ends, the forms, these kinds of things, not just matter and energy, not just efficient and material causes, but formal and final causes. These are the things that Bacon wanted out of our heads. Bacon wanted us to forget about formal and final causes because those put limits on what we're allowed to do.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that makes again, getting far too deep into the worldview thing just to get a basic grasp on who Bombadil is. Why did Tolkien have to do that? But no, that's actually excellent stuff, because as you say in the book, it's the kind of enigma not in a modern mechanistic sense where it's a problem to be solved, but something that invites curiosity, further investigation, and so even just getting into things that are seemingly as simple and whimsical as the various lines of Bombadil or whatever. Suddenly now you're talking about the 7 fundamental forms of education and the meaning of nature and the forms and Thomism, and getting all into the weeds like that. It's quite a great starting point in that respect, I guess. And so how would I get on with this? So I completely lost my train of thought for a second. And so I remember you mentioning in your book that the kind of power that Bombadil wields, because you see him describing him that he's leaping and totally obvious all over the place on top of hills, carefree, absolutely no sense of fear of any threat around him, even though the world around him is getting very dangerous and threatening. You describe this as a kind of power, not one that's seeking something that's raw and unlimited, but a kind of power that knows its limits. So you'd say that Tom Bombadil, he actually has limits. No way. But also he knows those limits.
Yeah, he knows those limits, and those limits are the secret to his freedom. So to me, the most revealing episode is at the table when Tom just turns to Frodo and says, "Show me the precious ring." He speaks in the imperative mood, and Frodo responds immediately. Every other time when somebody says, "I want to see the ring," Frodo's hesitant, but here he's just carefree, just immediately pulls the chain out, removes the ring from the chain, and hands it over to Tom without any hesitation. Then Tom takes the ring and he holds it up to his eye, and he looks at the hobbits and kind of smiles and does that. And they're disturbed initially by this, but again, what is it that we associate with Sauron? The eye. The eye of Sauron. Now, what is the eye of Sauron but the panopticon? So if you're familiar with Jeremy Bentham and his thoughts on prisons, he had this thing he called the panopticon, which was essentially a prison in which there was a central watcher, and all of the cells surrounded him, and so he was able, the central watcher was able to keep an eye on everything. By the way, that's what Google is. When you hear the word Google, what does that bring to mind? It means Googling, which means looking. Who's looking? Well, you think you're looking, but you're actually the one that's being looked at. Constantly, everything you're doing, this very conversation is being recorded, and it's being saved at a listening station in Utah. I don't know if you know, but it's actually the case. There's there's a listening station that NSA, the National Security Administration, runs there.
And saved on StreamYard's own hosting servers, because I save my videos here. So yeah.
So anything we say can and will be used against us. but what you got with that kind of knowing is the Sauron project, and what is Bombadil doing? I think he's mocking Sauron at that moment. And then to further mock him, he puts the ring on. And the hobbits initially are, well, that's interesting. But then they realize he doesn't disappear. He holds it up to the candlelight. He's got it on his little finger. Tolkien makes a point of saying it was the little finger. In other words, it wasn't even, in other words, Tom's big brown hand is larger than Saran's. So he's got it on his little finger. And then he doesn't disappear. And the hobbits are astonished, and Tom laughs. And then he takes the ring off and he flips it in the air and makes it disappear. And then, of course, they're, shocked at that point. And Frodo is startled and disturbed. And then Tom smiles, and then, like an uncle at the table who's performing magic tricks for his nephews.
Yeah.
He pulls the ring out and says, "Here you go." He gives it back with a smile. And then Frodo puts it on his finger because he's kind of annoyed that Tom has made fun of this thing that everybody else thinks is so important. And he tries to sneak away, and Tom says, "Where are you going, Frodo?" He looks right at him. "Get back and sit down. Take that off your finger." And anyway, so that demonstrates that that not even Saran can catch Tom. And Tom may be more powerful than Saran, but we're not told enough to know if that's actually the case. We know at the Council of Elrond that they don't think that he would be able to resist Saran in the end. But again, that's their opinion.
Yeah, that's right. And that actually does give a case that, even though it's seemingly not narratively significant, in another way it actually is. Because as you mentioned, you see him just flippantly playing with this thing that even Gandalf himself hesitates to even touch, because it says that through me it would wield a greater power than, like, basically anyone else. And so even this, if I'm not mistaken, he was a Maiar, so one of those somewhat primordial spirits, and he himself didn't want to touch the ring because it could wield such a great power. And yet here you have this random hippie out in the forest just playing with it, around, and nothing happens with him. And so that speaks absolute volumes of his power. And this kind of points to my own initial thoughts. I'm wondering how much you agree on this or not, because again, I haven't fully finished your book. Apologies, but I wonder. My initial reaction was to think that this does Bombadil, to kind of get into the question of how it reflects a Christian ideal. It seems to reflect. I don't know if it's more appropriate to say either a kind of pre-fall or a post Return of Christ ideal, in the sense of something that is just so perfect that even when this little metal thing that encapsulates the ultimate evil, it's just flippantly played with, and it doesn't have any effect on the person. Does that reflect a Christian ideal, or is it just he's trying to be happy with the kids?
No, I think that he is a kind of Adamic figure. He says, "I'm the oldest." We're told he's fatherless by Elrond. That was the name that the elves gave him, the fatherless one. And so with those things in mind, I can't help but think of Adam in the
kind of screaming that way. I mean, for Tolkien, who says that he's not a guy who likes to do direct allegory and all that, and if I'm not mistaken, that's the feud he had with C.S. Lewis. That one seems kind of pretty obvious when you look deep into it.
Well, I think that what he didn't want is, when you think about allegory in kind of the Bunyan sense, this equals that. There's kind of like cardboard standees. It's like a puppet show. What's Christian stand for? What does hopeful stand for? So there's no power that the reader can exercise. You are completely at the under the thumb of the author. That's what bugged Tolkien about allegory, is that being under the domination of the author. He wanted readers to have some freedom to explore, to think, to maybe work with things in ways that maybe he didn't even think of when he was writing. No, he's not a postmodernist. It's not all about the reader.
Yeah, it's
You know
not
how
that kind of insane
no,
reading, interpretation is power, and all that stuff. Yeah.
yeah. The problem with postmodernism is it's just kind of the evil twin of modernism.
Mm.
It's sort of like the mirror image of the reverse. Both of them have rejected the older vision, but they accentuate one part of the older vision to the exclusion of the other. Whereas the older vision, the medieval or classical vision, uh, embodied them both. So there's a kind of freedom that the reader enjoys in the older view, but that's because we're living in a meaningful world, not just something that goes on inside our heads, a kind of the Kantian, we're all trapped in our heads and can't get out thing.
Mm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And with that very much pre-fall reflection with Bombadil, I believe if I'm not mistaken, this is more or less the topic of your final chapter, and it speaks a lot of like the goodness of like mundane, restful lifestyle, where there isn't eventually, well, whether pre-fall or post second coming, there isn't this great struggle. It's just the it's a beautiful life of mundanity, of if that is that the word, mundane,
Well,
mundane life.
mundane means world,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and
yeah.
and the I guess the beautiful thing that you see is that this is a rest.
Mm.
So, like when you talk about a Sabbath rest, you know how people respond. Oh, you mean I don't get to do anything? I can't have fun.
Not
That
quite.
kind of, that's kind of the way we look at things. And then you talk about like heavenly rest. Oh, we're just gonna like hang out on the clouds of the angels and play harps. That's gonna get so dull. I want to go to hell where we're gonna rock all. You know how that nonsense is. Anyway, but
Yeah.
what you have with Tom is delight in the world. This is a guy who's the oldest creature in the world, and every day he gets up singing and whistling, and he's just like every day is like a gift. It's beautiful. This is great.
Yeah.
There are peas growing out there. Can you believe it? That kind of stuff.
Oh, look at those flowers over there.
That's right. I mean, there's just a delight that he really embodies that's beautiful. So at the very end of the story, when the hobbits get back to the Shire and they discover that Saruman is Sharky, and he's set up shop there in Bag End and all that kind of stuff, and they say, well, we don't have anything to worry about. Gandalf, you're going to be with us, right? And Gandalf says, nope, my job's done. I'm done. I'm officially retired. But he doesn't know how to be retired. And so what does he say? He says, I'm going to have a long conversation with Bombadil. Now, to me, that's a very significant statement. That's essentially saying Tom is the master of rest. Tom is a picture of rest. What rest is really intended, how it's really intended to be understood and practiced. Tom knows how to rest, and Gandalf needs to learn how to do it.
Yes. Yeah. So that rest really does. that's that Sabbath rest idea, very much pre-fall idea, that actually reflects, in a sense, an ultimate end, an ultimate good end, where we're not enthralled by the struggle against evil, which is it's more or less a necessary thing today. We need to be able to keep vigilant and zealous in that respect, but it's not the ultimate. It's not something where if you're not going to be able to enjoy, well, if you're a sanctified believer, and if you're going to be in that second kingdom in the end, or second coming rather, you are going to enjoy just the mundane life and the mundane rest, and be able to be able to just enjoy every day of it. It's going to be,
and you're not going to sit around like talking about the glory days all the time.
Yeah,
like, like when you're in high school,
every day is a glory day.
That's right. In the United States, there are a lot of guys who peak early in high school and letter in several sports, and then they spend the rest of their lives like reliving it. They just never get past it. They just they can't go back. They miss it. If we have this idea that meaning is the war with evil, then that's the way we're going to think about it. but if we understand meaning as sort of the nature of things and delighting in our communion with those things, um, we can be the master without having a, uh, a tyranny.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I guess to kind of tie it all, because I guess you've more or less answered this in long form throughout this interview, but to really put it into one simple, densely packed answer, can the Christian, or more likely, what can the Christian incorporate in his life and his thinking just from this episode of Tom Bombadil in the story?
Right. Well, I think there are a couple of contrasts that I really stress throughout the book. One is the contrast between domination and dominion, because I think sometimes, because our thinking has been shaped by the world's attitudes, when we hear the word dominion, we think domination. And I've actually come across Christians that make me a little uncomfortable because they're all enthusiastic about dominion, but what they really mean is what Serrano's up to. But they're going to do it in Jesus' name. You get my drift. But I also think that the contrast between control and communion is huge. So there's always going to need to be, some exercise of control in any community. I mean, we can't just let everybody do anything that they feel compelled or sort of desire to do. I mean, if we did, we wouldn't be able to live with each other. But the goal should be communion. So, as a father, as a husband, do I have authority? You bet. Am I at all uncomfortable exercising authority? No. Do my kids love me? I think so. And they even seem to like me. But they're adults now. They have homes of their own. They don't like do my bidding. I'm not like trying to run their lives. No, they're at a phase of life where it's time to have communion, where we enjoy being in each other's presence, where we talk about things, and I'm always, pleased with it when they ask my advice about something, but I'm not like always giving advice and expecting them to do it. It's not like that. But so communion, control, dominion, domination, and then rest. Rest understood in the sense that we've been talking about.
Yes, that makes perfect sense, and that does seem all these themes with Bombadil. It just so happens that the major things you need to understand Bombadil are the very things that our modern worldview just does not. The collective modern zeitgeist, I guess, just does not give you even the basic categories to think in. Like not even just not having those correct conclusions, but not even having the language to actually build it up with, as you said, everything discussing about like the very definition of power and dominion in today's world just being completely mirror opposite, or just alien to the older way of thinking. Likewise, the idea of language, names, music, basically everything that is essential to understanding Bombadil, completely missing. And so I guess that is also a big explanation for why so many people, you can find them being so frustrated with Bombadil's mere existence and just eye roll.
What right does this person have to exist?
Yeah, exactly. Why is this guy just so like happy and just random and all over the place? No, he needs to have a purpose. He needs to be a deep character with flaws and development and struggle. No, he's wholesome. Keep it that way.
That's right.
But yes, I would say we're moving on to Q&A, but it doesn't seem like we don't have any questions with this, because I think this discussion has just been that clear and comprehensive on this topic. That, and it's well, let's be real, it's quite niche compared to a lot of other things. So I don't know how many people really get it. Never mind. We actually do have a couple of questions from a man.
Okay, great.
All right. Would you understand Bombadil to be the same character between the Adventures of Bombadil and Lord of the Rings?
Yes, I think so. I do. Now, does that mean that Tolkien had fully developed his thinking on Tom when he wrote the initial poem, or when he originally wrote it? No, Since I write fiction, and so I've written short stories and novels and stuff. I think I have an insight into how writers of fiction work, and often it's a process of discovery. And what's fun about this is that all sorts of authors agree that when you write fiction in the right way, it's a process of discovery. So even secular atheist authors will concede this. Now, they don't have any metaphysics to understand it, they just note it. But as Christians, we do have the metaphysics to understand it. But do I think he had it all figured out when he created Tom initially? No, I don't think that's the case. But when he inserted Tom into the story, someone he had already done a lot of thinking about and actually written about, yes, I do think when he came to write Lord of the Rings, he knew what he was doing. He understood Tom and put him in the story very purposefully.
Okay, yes. What are you currently reading?
Oh, wow. I'm reading Augusto Del Noce's book, The Crisis of Modernity, right here. So
okay, it seems quite fitting to today's topic.
Yeah, Del Noce is great. I'm also working through a number of things. I'm bad this way. I start about 10 books and read it, till I get to a place where I'm ready for a break, and then I pick up another book. So I do. I do eventually get through them, or at least many times I do, maybe most of the time even, but it takes me a while.
Yep. That makes perfect sense. Okay. Man, Athanasius, I think we already answered this. What did you think of the Rings of Power? I don't think you saw it, did you? Or...
No, I don't intend to. I mean, I've seen things but it was against my will. It was because I wanted to see something else, and they inserted an advertisement for it. And it's like, I gotta wait. Let's watch this until it's over. That kind of thing. And basically, they're doing the same thing they did with Star Wars. They're taking it and trying to, and they're ruining it because they don't understand. I mean, so this is where the Jungians are some, at least when George Lucas originally wrote Star Wars, he had done some work in Joseph Campbell's books and stuff. And so he very self-consciously based Luke Skywalker on the hero's story, the hero's journey. The morons who write today, they think it's all arbitrary. They don't think that anything is based on anything. It's just will to power.
They love to do the whole subversion thing of like, oh, these good guys, oh no, they do these dark and evil things as well. It's actually the lines of good and evil are blurred, and it's like, wow, so original. You're a really deep thinker for making that story. No one's ever made that before. 2023. Wow. So yeah, that makes sense. Who is the pianist playing behind you? They have a great taste.
It's my wife. She's a piano teacher.
Oh, lovely.
So she's actually got one of her students in the other room. Yeah, it's actually in the front of the house. So I meant to mention that. I didn't know if you would be able to hear.
We could actually hear that a little bit, but it wasn't like loud or distracting. It was like a occasional nice background music to your exposition, I guess. So maybe you should try that some other time. Maybe like coordinate times for when the music's played for when you're speaking about what thing.
Right. Yeah.
Oh man. Inspiring Philosophy is a great video about the Rings of Power portraying Tolkien's philosophy. Tolkien's objection to Narnia was that Santa Claus made no sense being in Narnia. Santa makes perfect sense. Ipso facto, Bombadil makes perfect sense times 30. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm glad he feels that way. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's just a marvelous thing about the Inklings. I don't think they let each other in fully on what they were up to. So why didn't... So Michael Ward's book, Planet Narnia, I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's basically an exposition on the Chronicles of Narnia, demonstrating that medieval cosmology is actually the framework within which the stories are told. So each of the stories thematically represents one of the planets. So the planet that the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe represents is Jupiter. And Jupiter is regal, but he's also festive, and the Father Christmas character is exemplifies the festivity of Jupiter.
Okay. So there's a bit more to it than meets the eye. Okay. We do not have any more questions, so I believe that may be it for now. Pastor Wiley, would you like to plug anything, whether it's your
Okay.
book itself or anything else that you're doing right now, or anything you want other people to see?
Well, sure. I mean, there are a couple of things. So I have a podcast with a couple of other guys called the Theology Pugcast. If people want to follow that, you can do that. If you're in the United States, I'm going to be speaking at the Thank God for Bitcoin conference in Miami in May. That's going to be fun. I'm going to be right along. Have you ever heard of a guy named Zuby?
I have not.
Zuby is kind of a big deal in Twitter and so forth, but he's actually from the UK. He's an Oxford grad and black guy, and but he's going to be speaking there I'm going to be alongside him. That's going to be fun. And then we've got a conference here in Battleground, the Traditional Fatherhood Intensive, which is going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be May 6th, 5th, and 6th. So anyway, if folks want to learn about those things, you can go to the church website for the church I serve, or to crwiley.com. That's my author site. I never update it, but you can go there.
Makes perfect sense. And actually, I'm going to post the link to your main book right now with respect to this topic in the House of Tom Bombadil to the Canon Press link. People can go follow that link. I just posted right here. And I'm going to put it in the description after the fact, so that's most upfront and obvious, or perhaps in a pinned comment below, so people can go purchase the book upon which this interview was based. And I guess with all of that, Pastor Wiley, thank you so much for this epic opportunity. God willing, at least a few people are interested in this otherwise niche topic. And even those who otherwise normally aren't, but are curious, can actually get something great out of it. Because I think, as we've seen today, as you've very clearly shown, Bombadil, his character and story, has a lot to tell us about where we ought to be headed in our way of thinking. So thank you so much for coming on, Pastor Wiley.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks for asking. Great. It's been great to be with you, Paul.
No problem. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been Pastor Wiley. This has been the other Paul. I hope you have a lovely day or evening. God bless.